Talking of lunacy, let's talk about the Bank of England for a second, shall we? Now, the Bank of England, in my opinion, need to take some real responsibility for the way that the economy has panned out over the last 12 months in particular. Now, notwithstanding the fact that, of course, there are lots and lots of outside influences. So, of course, the invasion of Ukraine nearly 2 years ago and what that did to energy prices, if you can remember back to that was a real turbocharging of inflation because, of course, if energy prices increase, so does the price of everything else that ends up in our shops. But the Bank of England really have a responsibility to not having seen the inflation that we've seen over the last 12 months or more coming. So the Bank of England, apart from being responsible for printing money, they have one job, basically, which is to make sure that they keep us within the 2% target that they agree with the government. And to be clear, the Bank of England are independent. So that's something that Gordon Brown brought about in 1997 when he walked into number 11 Downing Street as Chancellor for the first time. And so we now have a Bank of England, effectively, that is unaccountable. No one elects the Bank of England governor, currently Andrew Bailey, previously Mark Carney. They are put in place by the government, by the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. So they have responsibility, but you could argue without any accountability whatsoever. What should they have tried to have done to stem inflation as it started to increase to double figures for the first time in decades, a year and a half or so? Well, they could have stopped printing money. They could have stopped fueling the economy with cash. That would have stopped us spending, perhaps. They also could have perhaps increased interest rates slightly sooner, rather than sitting on their hands. But anyway, all of that notwithstanding, and the fact that there's a big dollop of responsibility that lands in Andrew Bailey's lap for the situation we're in, this week, just today, he is said within the Daily Telegraph to have issued the following warning to us, that wage growth is now out of control. We are asking for and receiving pay rises that are too much. So the rate of wage inflation is something like 8%. That has now overtaken inflation. I guess what Andrew Bailey is now worried about, because he has his hand on the tiller where inflation and controlling inflation is concerned, he's now worried that that increase in wage inflation is going to reignite inflation itself, and he's going to have a bit of a problem. So what he's basically saying to you and I is we shouldn't really be looking to be paid quite as much as we would like to be, particularly when pay rises are concerned in the coming weeks and months. However, I have a bit of a problem with that on the basis that Andrew Bailey himself is on £550,000 per annum. That's what he earns. And not only that, get this, but the Bank of England, who of course employ thousands and thousands of people, have just dished out this year the princely sum in bonuses to those staff of £25 million. It's an average of about £20,000 per member of staff. How on earth does that man have the gall, the brass neck, to say to us, as the population that have been beleaguered as a consequence of this cost of living crisis and inflation, which he is responsible for, how on earth does he have the gall to tell us that we should wind our necks in when it comes to the money that we want to earn in terms of us then being able to put food on the table? Andrew Bailey, how dare you? To talk about this with me is Dr. Roger Gewolb, who is personal finance and credit expert and founder of fairmoney.com and the Campaign for Fair Finance. Roger, thanks for joining me. Do you agree with me?
Every word, absolutely.
Okay, end of conversation then. That was easy. I mean, the man's a maniac, isn't he?
Well, I mean, it's worse than you describe, because, of course, his 14 interest rate rises, which did nothing to combat inflation, because the kind of inflation we have had is not consumer driven. So just as the bank did in 2009, he should, the one place I may disagree ever so slightly with you, if I may, is that he shouldn't have raised interest rates earlier or fast. He shouldn't have raised them at all. We have the same situation in 2009. The then Bank of England left the rates untouched for 3 years. What he should have done is not raise the rates. And the 14 rises, you talk about the gall, that's what created a huge part of the cost of living crisis, which made it necessary for wages to rise. You know, it's just absolutely absurd. The economy is shrinking, but I fear not so fast as the credibility of Mr. Bailey and the Bank of England.
Yeah, indeed. And this 2% inflation target, Roger, is it about time that we start to get a bit more realistic about that? Because the quest by Andrew Bailey and co to get us back to that means that he's going to overclub things, and has, in my opinion, overclub things in terms of that continuing quest to increase interest rates. And, you know, famously, he and Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, have both said that if raising interest rates to where they are now, so 5.25% as opposed to the 0.1% that they were a year and a half ago, if that leads us into recession, so be it. I mean, I can't believe I'm hearing that.
I agree. Well, I mean, I actually don't believe much. Speaking of economics, I think this government is sometimes quite economical with the truth. I mean, 2 weeks ago, we had Mr. Hunt telling us there won't be any tax cuts. Today, we've got the Prime Minister. We had this morning Robert Jenrick talking about, well, you know, maybe we'll get rid of stamp duty, maybe we'll get rid of inheritance tax. Well, why do we slash the top rate of tax for the very rich? I mean, if you want to slash some rates, why didn't you slash the bottom threshold and take it from 12,570 to 20,000, so the millions of poor people that shouldn't be in the tax net given the inflation won't be there?
Yes, I agree. And also corporation tax. So, you know, I accept the point that corporation tax is paid on profit, so it's not paid on revenue. So you could argue it doesn't really affect companies, but of course it does, because if you're paying 25% across your bottom line instead of 19%, which is what it was until Rishi Sunak announced 3 years ago he was going to put it up, well, then you're much less likely to expand and to invest in plant, machinery, people, projects, and so on. You know, the fact we have a Conservative government that actually, when it comes to taxation, thinks that raising taxes so that we are now the most taxed that this nation has ever been is quite incredible to me as a Conservative voter, or rather a former Conservative voter, quite who I'll vote for next time. I genuinely have no idea. So, I mean, between Rishi Sunak, Jeremy Hunt, and I'll be careful how I say that, and Andrew Bailey, I mean, you couldn't have a worse collision of circumstances or individuals, could you?
No, the Bailey-ocerus and his other thick-skinned colleagues, they just won't listen to all the people who tell them that this is wrong, wrong, wrong. That corporation tax, as you rightly point out, which came into effect, having been increased by a whole third from 19 to 25, as you say, came into effect on 1st of April, was probably passed on to you and me within a fortnight in the middle of this horrible cost of living. Sure, companies should pay tax on their profits, but wrong time to introduce it.
Yeah, yeah. And look, we are in the midst of a cost of living crisis. We can argue all day long as to what the cause of that is, but what we need to look to now are solutions, of course. I think one of the solutions is a tax cut. Andrew Bailey and Jeremy Hunt are saying that they don't agree with that because they think that will fuel inflation still further. But whether it be a tax cut to the individual or corporation tax, or as you rightly point out, you know, an incentivization tax cut to those that are earning at the top of the tree, so to speak, you know, so that it trickles down a little bit. I mean, that would seem to me to be sensible. And actually, from a political point of view, Roger, and I know you're not here as a political commentator as such, but surely the right thing to do for a Conservative government in the run-up to a general election would be to cut taxes, wouldn't it? A bit like Thatcher did.
I'm very much a political commentator. I do that as well as money. And I have said all over the place, I have this theory. I've said it so many times, I don't know if anybody's listening, but there won't be any tax cuts for a while. But I'm sure that we will have massive tax cuts by the next general election, tax cuts so large that labor cannot match them. And what all these stealth taxes and all the rest of this taxation, the highest in 70 years, is building up a massive of surplus, like the 55 billion pound black hole last November, if you remember, half of which a couple days later didn't exist anymore, when we actually, some think tanks said had a 30 billion pound surplus. I think this is all gaslighting. They're building up a war chest to give us giant tax cuts.
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope so. It was interesting, actually, to see John Redwood, the former minister, on Twitter today, was talking about the fact that the OBR and most forecasters have got all of the numbers with to the Treasury and the money coming in through taxation versus the cost of servicing borrowing those numbers are all wrong, and we're quite used to now experts being wrong, of course. We had that during the entirety of the pandemic, during 2020, 21 and 22. So, if that is also true, then I think there might be some merit in what you're saying, that there is some money being stored up, ready to give back to us, because after all, it is our money, isn't it, in a few months' time. So, well, look, we'll see. But where do you think inflation lands, Roger? I mean, inflation seems to be under control now. If everyone does what Andrew Bailey's telling us to do, and to show restraint when it comes to the extra money that we ask of our employers in response to the cost of living crisis and the increase, I mean, where do you think inflation lands? Do you genuinely think it's under control now? Do you think the worst of inflation's over?
I think it's just incredible cheek, if I can just interject. As you said, Andrew Bailey and his cohorts have got two jobs. One is to print money or not print money, and the other is to raise or lower interest rates. That's all. Their job is not to be telling us what to do or how to live our lives. So for him to come out with this statement, don't give yourself rises while he's doing it, is just crazy. Where I think inflation will go, this is cost push inflation is the technical term. It's not consumer driven. In other words, people have to buy food and they have to heat their homes. There's nothing really that they can cut. And so it falls by itself, as I said, in 2009, as it did, and the Bank of England left it untouched. Now, however, the 14 interest rate rises have driven up the cost of living so high, and the cost of doing business, and the costs that businesses are now passing on to
and homeowners. Homeowners that are on variable rate mortgages are seeing a catastrophic increase in the cost of their mortgages. Absolutely,
and no relief anywhere, even on fuel duty, which is a triple tax. I mean,
and a rumour today that Jeremy Hunt in the autumn statement will increase fuel duty for the first time in, I think, 15 years. If he does that, I mean, look, no wonder he's also, the rumours are that he's going to stand down at the next general election. I mean, if he does that, politically, he's a dead man walking, surely.
Well, I mean, Jeremy has never worked 24 hours in his life in any financial business, and yet he's running the finances of the country.
Or in any business, I suspect. Or any business, let alone a financial business. It's like most politicians, they don't have world experience, do they?
No, to his credit, he started an educational business, which he sold. But he's never been in a bank or anything like that. But I mean, do you know that when petrol was £1.80, the government tax take was £1.56?
I do, and also here's another fact that most people don't realise, is that the fuel duty amount, which is fixed per litre, I think it's 57 pence fuel duty, also attracts VAT. So the government charges you, when you put fuel in your tank as a consumer, you get charged tax on tax.
It's a triple tax. You get charged tax on the fuel, VAT, VAT, tax on the VAT, and remember, the pounds that you put your hand in your trouser pocket and pay at the pump with have already suffered PAYE.
They've already been taxed. I know, yeah, you're right, triple tax. So incredible. Talking of tax, there was an interesting suggestion, a leak in the Sunday papers today that suggests that Rishi Sunak might be looking to cut the rate of stamp duty, particularly for first-time buyers. Now, first-time buyers already get a gesture at the bottom end of the market in terms of the first element, the first chunk of money that they pay for a home purchase being tax exempt where stamp duty is concerned. Now, it's, from me as a property person, that's my background, great news to hear that might happen and might actually be an injection in the arm of the property market, because my belief also is that a buoyant property market then has a positive implication, if you like, for the wider economy. I don't know if you saw that, and it would make some sense because, of course, the Conservatives are all about, or true Conservatives are, I'm not sure about Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, but true Conservatives are all about home ownership and the encouragement of home ownership, because they believe that people that own a property are more likely to vote Conservative. So do you think there might be some truth in the rumour or the alleged leak with regard to stamp duty?
The rumour, alleged leak I saw was that it would be either what you say about stamp duty or inheritance tax.
As both. Well. Let's hope both, Roger.
Well, let's hope both. And they can lop off the top rate for the richest earners. But, gee, I'm a people's champion. This is what I do. I'm a fair consumer expert and activist. And I really wish they would raise that bottom tax threshold, because nothing else they're going to do will alleviate the suffering of people who are not large earners from this cost of living crisis as that. And yet there's no mention of it. And, you know, the crazy thing is that labor hasn't even attacked and said, well, for goodness sake, that's what we would do. Now, is that because they want the Tories to hang themselves, do you think? Or is it because, and they're saving it, or it's because they're not going to do it either?
They're already hung, I think, Roger. Roger Gewolb, thank you very, very much indeed for your contribution. You and I agree on everything. You weren't like my last two guests brief before. So thank you very much indeed for joining me on Talk TV. Roger Gewolb, thank you very much. I'm going to take a call now.